Christene Marie. I am excited tonight to chat about how we can get to know ourselves better. I lived for the majority of my life very, very disconnected from me. And the primary reason for that was because I was living so much in response and in reaction to who I believe my parents wanted me to be, who I was told I should be, both in a religious context and also just by my friends and my family. And so that's so natural for so many of us to just grow up and live in reaction and in response rather than living proactively, rather than living from this rooted place and knowing who we are. We are responding to who other people tell us to be. And in one sense, that's very natural. As children, we're very much so reliant on our caretakers. And so, especially if we're raised by folks that aren't the best, there's a consequence to that, and we have to do a lot of reconciliation in our adulthood, I guess, or even adolescence, where we have to figure out, okay, well, who am I? I grew up so beautifully loved, but because of there's a lot of reasons, I'm sure, but one of the contributing reasons was just growing up in a very religious environment where I was, the shoulds were very explicit. You should be X, Y, and Z. You should do X, Y, and Z. And so because of that religious focus, I was fixated on everything external. How do I do the right thing and live as I should externally by way of what I do to earn love, rather than this very intrinsic, predicated love for who I am. And so value was fundamentally placed on everything external and all of our behaviors rather than who we actually are. And so over the last couple of years, I've really come to know who I am. And it's an ongoing journey, which honestly makes it so fun. I'm glad that I'm never going to arrive and say, okay, I know who I am, I'm done. We're constantly learning because we're constantly living. And frankly, the more we live, the more we experience the fullness of life, there's more of us that we come to know. And what's also cool too, not just in the experience of life, but also in, there's something about breadth and depth. And so the deeper we actually go in these experiences, but then the more frequently we have them and the width we have, man, there's like so much to come to know. And to that point, we get to add to who we are. So it's like, okay, well, who am I? Who was I created to be at my baseline, at my core? And then who do I want to be? How do I want to guide and orient my life? But first, we need to, like 𝐤𝐚𝐢𝐥𝐲 said when he was creating the sculpture of David, he had to remove who David was not. And only after we get to the core essence of who we were made to be in the first place can we then add on and create, really truly create, whether it's creating something from us that's impacting the external world or creating and adding to our personhood. It's just so exciting. And there's so much power in how we get to choose to live because the power is in the choice. And I'm actually in the middle of a knowing retreat right now. I can hear everyone upstairs getting ready. One of the things I love best about the knowing retreat is that it's effectively like this big slumber party. Everyone's staying in the house. And we're in Frederick, Maryland, and it's just really special. So I'm hearing everyone upstairs and me. We're going through a whole bunch of questions today. And it was such a meaningful day. And I wanted to share some of those questions with you because we went down a lot of rabbit holes. We really got to some really deep places for most of us. And it was really wonderful. So I wanted to share some of the questions with you just because I've seen how they've changed my life and I've seen how they've impacted many others. And so this is, I suppose you could say, my gift to you. And I hope you'll take time to answer them and to really consider them. So with that, I am pulling up the little document that I posed some of these questions that I wrote. The first question that we led with today was the question of what was your healthiest time of your life? When were you the most healthy, mentally, physically, spiritually, etc.? When were you most healthy? And the reason why that really matters is because if we want to experience growth, it's really important that we actually identify when we're the most healthy times of our lives so that we can actually have those, I guess you could say, even preventative measures to protect us in place as we're on the pathway to growth. So if I know that, for example, this is true, me keeping my habits is one of the best ways for me to be healthy. Like when I'm most healthy, I'm actually on my habits. And so now I know moving forward that if I want to experience growth, my neutral starting point needs to include being on my habits. Just like how, emotional intelligence is a value of mine, emotional health is something I'm striving for. So if I want to grow, I need to have emotional intelligence as an ongoing pursuit so that, again, we're kind of building on top of these foundational pieces. So going back over when was I most healthy, every person here examined that question. And it was really interesting what we found. Some folks, actually, there was a common theme. A lot of folks were finding that they were most healthy when they were alone and just in communion with God. And Stephen, I just saw you say, Jesus is my savior. That was a big topic today that we talked about, really how to maintain communion with God and having that through line and connection with him over who are we? Who were we created to be in the first place? And we need to get clear on that before we can go and try to create something on top of that. And so there's something around the whole topic of when have I been most healthy? What was I doing? Who was I with? Who was actually involved in my life? What did community look like? What were my own individual routines and rhythms of my life? What did my relationship with God look like? Did I have a partner? Did I not? And what we saw that was so consistent across every single person was that everyone was alone. And where we kind of softly landed over dinner after, probably, I guess it was 7 hours of talking. And just every person, had time kind of in the spotlight to share what they were discussing, this question and others. But one of the things that we arrived at was it's really easy to be aligned when we're alone. Just the other day, I talked about why are relationships so incredibly hard. And it's so hard so often because people are holding up a mirror for us. And that's not comfortable. It's not comfortable to have a mirror held up to look in our reflection and see what's wrong. And it's so much easier to blame the other person than to assume responsibility for how we can change. And so when we think about when have we been most healthy, it's like, have I actually been in a relationship and been healthy, or have I had to be alone with no conflict to be my healthiest and best version of myself? And there's something obviously to be said for when we are in a relationship with someone who, it's just really, really hard. It's not, it's really hard to do life with them. That's a whole different conversation. I really want to just focus on the personal responsibility side of things. I went to therapy a couple weeks ago with my boyfriend, and my therapist said only 31% in regards to the relationship can actually be changed at a relationship level. The other 69% can only be changed on a personal level, which in one sense is so exciting. We have that much power to impact our lives and to curate real change, because it is so easy to sit on our laurels and wait for the other person to do the change that we're asking for, rather than us recognizing, man, I have so much power here to make real change, to cause something different to be the outcome of what I know. And so with that, while we get to recognize, okay, 69% of the total whole, it's up to me, and it's also up to the other person. But 31% is kind of a collective attempt at changing the relationship dynamic. So we have so much power over our lives, but it is really important that just as we talk a lot on the Knowing Show about going back and looking at the past, seeing what was wrong, seeing how the past shows up in the present, we also need to go back and look at the past for all of the good. When were we really happy? When were we at our best? When were we doing a job that we loved? Why did we love it? Because I believe it's the book Good to Great by Jim Collins. He talks about so many companies will effectively stop doing the thing that got them to where they are today. They make $5 million and they're like, how do we get to 10 million? And then they stop doing the thing that got them to 5 million in the first place. So we can't lose the pieces even if they're incredibly simple, even if they're incredibly easy and not sexy, we can't lose the pieces of who we are, the pieces about our lives that have been helpful in molding us to get to where we are today. This is where the audit comes in of course, not everything needs to stay. Probably a lot needs to go. And what's interesting, I was actually sitting with a woman tonight, and it was a really, really special moment. She's a mom of 6 kids. And, we were talking about there almost being a death of her moving out of that transition of being full-time mom. All her kids are grown, all the kids are gone, all the kids are becoming her peer, and they want to help her and love on her and help take care of her. And so she's kind of like, what's my place? And there's a death that needs to take place in that. In a death in the most beautiful sense of like, it's time for a rebirth. It's time for the next level. It's actually a leveling up in the game that is our life. And in that, there's so much excitement. There's so much beauty in the possibility, in the adventure that awaits. But in that adventure, there's a lot of uncertainty. We don't know what the adventure holds. So are we willing to pack our bags and go on the adventure of creating something new, whether it's professionally, personally, relationally, and even spiritually? I was actually sharing with my uncle 2 days ago on New Year's Day. I shared with him, I actually didn't ask a lot of questions about God because I didn't know what I would find. And that's scary. I don't know what would happen. Am I going to lose faith? Am I going to walk away from God? What's going to happen to me if I start questioning it? And I think because of the fear of the uncertainty, that keeps us small, that keeps us safe, rather than acknowledging the truth. And so often the truth actually is, I don't know. The truth is, I'm not entirely certain. And therein lies an exciting element of I get to explore the world for myself, rather than just taking the world as my parents told me or as someone else told me. And so the first question, about how to get to know ourselves better is, when were you the healthiest? And the next one that we examined was the original me. And so the 2 questions there were, what qualities or desires were attributed to you as a child? Like, how did you show up as a kid? What was life giving to you? What was so happy? Because again, we don't want to stop doing the things that are causing so much growth for us, or stop doing the things that just bring us joy. And a lot of times I forgot. Honestly, I forgot what I loved to do. And it was only when I was in therapy like 3 or 4 years ago when I remembered how much I loved to play dress up, and now I love dressing nice and looking pretty, And so we all have those things in childhood that we probably forgot about, that need to resurge and need to become alive in us. Because in that process, we become so much more real. It's like, I'm thinking, what's the film where like the toy, Pinocchio. Pinocchio becomes a real boy. There's something about us becoming flesh and bone when we're actually truly living, truly ourselves, versus being literally a phantom, looking and sounding like everyone around us. And honestly, when we think about why is it that in childhood we got to have that connection and that degree of visceral experiential life, well, we weren't sitting behind our phones. And so if we really want to experience life today, so much of that is actually pretty predicated on, am I willing to engage with life in the discomfort of putting down my phone and not hiding behind it, but actually truly living? And so to that question of, in childhood, who were you? What did you love? I just, man, if we were to all take that question and really act upon it this year and start, it's like feeding ourselves with real food, like go and engage with nature, go outside, get sunshine. I started sitting outside every day between like 7:30 and 8 when the sun was rising, and just getting that morning sunlight. And it feels like my body's getting like literal vitamins. And I know it's getting vitamin D, but it just feels like it's nourishing my whole faculty of being. Like my mind even is being fed just by the sunlight. And we were meant and created to be outside. We weren't meant to be on our phones. We weren't created for technology. We were created for experiencing nature. And I really want this upcoming year to be one that's so rich, so full of life, experiential. And honestly, that's what we're seeing with businesses. My prediction for this year is that more and more businesses are going to realize that experience is really the currency. So they're going to start making purchase decisions based off of the type of experience they'll have with a product offering or service. How much more so for our personal lives, that we really start to experience. Even here tonight, hosting 5 ladies here for the Knowing Retreat, we're experiencing something so real where we're all sitting around and answering these questions that I've asked of you tonight, but doing it in real time, doing it with other people in community, physically present, and then sitting down and having a meal together and laughing. And it's like all the walls just come all the way down. And there's that element where it is visceral. There's a song I love. I heard it probably 2 years ago. And then when a friend of mine passed away, it just really rang true even more. The lines of this song are, I want to live this one wild life. I want to rip it apart. We have one life, and it can be a wild life, and we get to engage with it at that level of like ripping it apart. I just want to live with such intensity and fervor, so much passion, where we're so engaged, and life is truly beautiful, and we get to choose. That's one of the things, I heard somebody say recently, they were kind of lamenting over how they want to create this beautiful life. I'm like, well, you're living it. You're actually doing it. I was there. I was at your house. You are creating a beautiful life. You are living a beautiful life. Do you realize that? Or are we constantly fixated on the future and not actually present to enjoy and engage with what a beautiful world we're living in right now? There's so much goodness. There's so much beauty if we so choose to see it. And if we choose to see it, all of a sudden we see it everywhere. The second question, or I guess the third question, is the conditioned me. What parts of my personality, behavior, or values was shaped by my environment? And who did I have to become to survive or be loved? And y'all, that's really important. Who did we have to become? What behaviors did we cultivate to survive in the environment in which we were raised or where we went to school? I was hosting a workshop a couple weeks ago, and someone was talking about how, one of their core memories is actually being, 7 years old, getting laughed at for running the baseball diamond wrong. Like, those things stick with us. And then he quit baseball at 7. You know what I mean? It's like we make such decisions predicated on a moment in time that forever is stamped on our minds and hearts, unless we go back and revisit it and then break free from that memory, so that maybe this man can actually train his kids to run the baseball diamond correctly. And then who knows, maybe one of them could be a professional baseball player one day. If we're constantly living in reaction to who everyone told us to be, rather than coming to remember who we were created to be, learning and discovering by chipping away and eliminating who we are not, that's the surest way to effectively finding out and remembering who we are. And then from that place, then we can add to it and create something new. But first we have to revisit that question of like, what parts of me were conditioned and trained and told who to be? And then the last thing, well, there's a number of other questions that I asked, but just for all intents and purposes here, I'll do one last kind of category and question. The lost me. What parts of me went underground as I entered adulthood? What traits, instincts, or gifts do I miss the most? And I love that question of what do I miss, because I found this to be true for me. There's like a longing for that part of me that was lost. I actually wrote in my journal in 2018, I wrote, I love bows and pretty things, but I wear black to keep me safe. And there was something that was effectively crying out in me, longing for beauty and longing for the joy that comes with that. But I just didn't let myself feel it because there was such a vulnerability there, and I didn't feel safe in my environment. And so there's parts of us that we miss. There's parts of us that have remained dormant for so long that, frankly, I think would really, really love a voice if we're willing to give it to them. But it takes the intentional time. These These folks are here 2 days. Other folks have joined me for the Knowing Retreat for 5 days, 4 days, and 3 overnights. And it's just wild. It takes time and it takes intentionality, but we unlock things that set us free. We were more free than ever before to engage with the world and create something new. It kind of sets us on a pathway of freedom to create and ideate and dream and really be alive. So to that point of my favorite song, I want to live this one wild life. I want to rip it apart. Y'all, we get the chance to do that, but we have to be awake in order to even start. And I lived my life for so much of the time asleep because I didn't know. I was so fixated on everybody else. I really was living as a phantom. So for anyone else who's ever experienced that, these are some questions that really, really helped me on my journey of coming to know who I am. And boy, I'll tell you, it's like the journey of a lifetime. And it's such a privilege to get to know who we are because each one of us was created for a very unique purpose and something very, very different. So with that, Shannon, thank you so much for joining here. Golden Tiger, Chief X, Wesley, Bren, thank you guys. Thank you so much for joining tonight. I really love this conversation around just how to get to know ourselves better. This probably is one of the most important things we can do, especially if we want to love other people better and give more of ourselves, being able to give from a full cup and being able to engage from a place of being so secure and rooted in our identity, in who God says that we are, versus looking to everyone around us to appease and make us feel better and meet our needs. Man, we can have such a big impact. The world needs love. I mean, I'm sure you know that. I feel that every day, But if we can be the ones to do our own tending to, our own healing, man, then there's so much love to give as a result of that. So Chief X, thank you so much for joining. Paul, thank you for coming on tonight. Appreciate you guys. And I will see you tomorrow morning. I started a mini series on the Knowing Show. I'm going through A Course in Miracles. I don't have my book. Oh, yes, I do. A Course in Miracles. I started this book last year, and there's like the main book look, you can see how thick it is. And then towards the end of it, they have a workbook where there's 365 lessons, one lesson per day. And I started going through this last year, and I went through, I think, probably 75, 80 days of just like every day I was doing this, and I loved it. But then I stopped and I tried to pick it back up and I didn't. So I figured if I go live with it every day, I'll at least be consistent. So tomorrow morning, I'll be going live with lesson 4 for January 4. And then I'll also be on the Knowing Show tomorrow night. So I hope you join me for one or either. But if not, I hope you have a wonderful evening.